I am 91 years old. You hear that number, and you probably imagine a life full of wisdom, a library of memories perfectly cataloged and understood. But the truth is, clarity is a cruel gift that arrives far too late. My body has become a fragile vessel. My bones ache with the memory of steps I took for granted, and my world has shrunk to the confines of this single room, a quiet testament to a life that was loud, busy, and tragically misunderstood by the man living it. At this age, you don't see life as a long, winding road anymore. You see it for what it was, a collection of single, unrepeatable moments. And I am here today, in the final chapter of my story, to confess that I was a ghost in most of mine. I was present, but I was never truly there. I spent a lifetime building for a future that I forgot to live in. And that is a silence that echoes louder than any storm. My days now are governed by a slow, predictable rhythm. The sun comes up, casting long shadows across the worn carpet, and the television hums in the corner, more for the illusion of company than for any real entertainment. On my nightstand, next to a glass of water I can barely lift, sits a photograph of my wife, Eleanor. Her smile is from 40 years ago, captured on a sunny afternoon we spent in the garden. I look at that picture every morning, and it's not just her I see. I see the ghost of the man I was, a man who was always rushing, always planning, always believing in the myth of later. I was convinced that real life would begin after the next promotion, after the mortgage was paid, after the kids were grown. I was so focused on arriving at a destination that I failed to realize the entire journey was the point. I was building a resume, a legacy of financial security, but I forgot to build a life with the one person who made any of it matter. And I only understood that devastating difference when she was gone. For most of my life, I wasn't a man. I was a project manager. My project was the future. Every morning, I'd wake up with a mental checklist already running: secure the promotion, increase the savings, pay down the mortgage faster. I remember the weight of my briefcase feeling more real than my wife's hand in mine. My world was the sterile, predictable hum of the office, the strategic conversations, the constant gnawing pressure to climb higher. I told myself, and I told Eleanor, that this sacrifice was a temporary investment in a future where we would finally have time. I was so convinced of this narrative that I failed to see it for the lie it was. I wasn't building a life for us. I was building a monument to my own ambition, using the bricks of our shared present. I saw every day not as a life to be lived, but as a resource to be spent in service of a tomorrow that I believed would be grander, easier, and more deserving of my full attention. I treated the present like a waiting room for the main event. When I came home, I was never truly there. I'd walk through the door, shed my coat, but I kept the armor of my work on. Eleanor would be in the kitchen, and the air would be filled with the smell of dinner, the sound of the radio playing softly, the very sounds of a life I claimed to be working for. She'd ask about my day, and I'd give her the headlines, the edited version, my mind still churning through unresolved problems and tomorrow's battles. I remember her trying to share the small, beautiful details of her world: a bird that built a nest in the old oak tree, a letter from a friend, a new recipe she tried. I would listen with half an ear, nodding, my eyes vacant. I was physically present, a warm body in a chair across the table, but my soul was still logged into the office. I took her presence for granted, a constant, comforting fixture in the house I was paying for. I didn't understand that her presence wasn't a feature of the house. It was the reason it was a home. The illusion I had built my life upon didn't crumble slowly. It was shattered in a single sterile moment. It happened in a doctor's office, one of those rooms with beige walls and plastic chairs designed to be forgettable, but which I will remember with perfect, agonizing clarity for the rest of my days. I was there, sitting next to Eleanor, my mind already halfway to a budget meeting I had later that afternoon. I was thinking about spreadsheets and projections when the doctor spoke. He used calm, clinical words: aggressive, advanced, limited options. But what I heard was the sound of a future being erased. In that instant, every promotion I had ever earned, Every dollar I had ever saved, every single sacrifice I had made in the name of later, became utterly worthless. The future I had been working toward, the one where Eleanor and I would finally have time, had just been canceled. I remember looking at her hand, so small in her lap, and realizing with a cold, sickening dread that I had been investing in a currency that was no longer valid. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital corridors and the relentless, rhythmic beeping of machines. For the first time in my adult life, my work became a distant noise, an irrelevant echo from another world. I sat by her bedside for hours, holding her hand, a gesture I had neglected for years. I was finally present, but it was a presence born of terror, not of choice. I tried to talk to her, to fill the sterile silence, but I found I had forgotten how. My language was that of meetings and reports. I didn't have the words for this. I would tell her about my day, the hollow, meaningless details, and she would just smile weakly, her eyes telling me she knew I was struggling. I was a stranger at the most important event of our shared life. She needed a husband, a partner who knew the landscape of her heart, and all I could be was a project manager overseeing a crisis, completely out of my depth, fumbling with emotions I had long since filed away as inefficient. One afternoon, when the morphine had given her a brief window of clarity, she turned to me, her voice a fragile whisper. She wasn't talking about the future or the pain. She was talking about a Tuesday morning, maybe 20 years prior. "Do you remember," she said, "that time you tried to make pancakes and you burned them so badly the smoke alarm went off? You were so embarrassed, but I couldn't stop laughing." I stared at her, my mind a blank. I had no memory of it. It was just another morning I had rushed through, another detail I had discarded as unimportant on my way to something bigger. And in that moment, it hit me like a physical blow. The life she cherished, the life that was now flashing before her eyes, was made up of these small, imperfect moments I had never even bothered to record. All my grand achievements meant nothing. She wasn't remembering the day my name was put on the office door. She was remembering burnt pancakes. I had built a legacy and she had built a life, and they were not the same thing. Her death was not a dramatic, cinematic event. It was quiet. It was the simple final act of a machine being switched off, followed by a silence so absolute, so profound, that it seemed to swallow all the air in the room. When I came home to our house that night, the silence followed me. It was in every room, in every empty chair, in the cold side of the bed. This was the silence I had once craved after a long day of noise and meetings. Now, it was a physical presence, a constant, deafening reminder of what I had lost. It wasn't just Eleanor I had lost. I had lost the entire soundtrack of my life. The sound of her humming in the kitchen, the sound of her laughter at a silly television show, even the sound of her gentle complaints about the toast. I had spent a lifetime chasing a future of quiet security, and now I had it. I was secure, and I was in a house filled with a silence so total it was the sound of my own failure. The game had changed without warning, and I had lost before I even understood the rules. After the funeral, after the well-meaning friends and their casseroles had all gone home, I was left alone with the silence. For a week, I tried to return to my old life, my old routines. I put on a suit, drove to the office, and sat at my desk, surrounded by the monuments of my success. But the numbers on the screen were just shapes, the phone calls were just noise. The ambition that had driven me for 50 years had simply vanished, like a ghost at sunrise. I realized with a chilling certainty that the man I had been was a stranger to me now. My entire identity was built on a foundation that no longer existed. I would come home to the empty house and wander from room to room, touching the back of her favorite armchair, running my fingers along the books she'd been reading. These small objects were screaming with her absence. I had spent my life building a fortress of financial security, believing it would protect us. But it was just a house. It was Eleanor who had made it a home, and I had been too busy fortifying the walls to ever truly live inside it with her. In the months that followed, my past became a relentless visitor. I'd sit in this very chair for hours, staring at the photograph on my nightstand, and my mind would play back scenes from our life together, but with a cruel new clarity. I saw all the moments I had dismissed as interruptions, as distractions from my real work. I remembered a time she called me at the office, her voice full of excitement because she'd seen a deer in our backyard. I remember telling her I was busy and I'd call her back, which I never did. I saw myself at dinner parties, half listening to her stories while my mind was on a quarterly report. I saw every missed opportunity, every rushed conversation, every time I chose the urgent over the important. It was a slow, agonizing audit of a misspent life. I wasn't just grieving her, I was grieving the man I could have been for her. I was facing the ghost of my younger self, and I had no defense against his foolish, arrogant certainty that there would always be more time. He was a fool, and I am the one who has to live with his debts. The weight of this new understanding began to crush me. I realized that my neglect wasn't confined to Eleanor. I thought about the friendships I'd let wither, the ones that dissolved over some forgotten point of pride or because I was simply too busy for a phone call or a weekend visit. I had treated all my relationships like business assets, to be managed and maintained with minimal investment. I had calibrated my entire life for efficiency, for progress, for a future that I saw as a destination. I never understood that life isn't a race to a finish line, it's a slow dance, and I had been staring at my feet the entire time, terrified of misstepping, while the music played on without me. I had achieved everything I set out to achieve. The mortgage was paid, the retirement was secure, the legacy was intact. And in the stark, unforgiving light of my solitude, I finally understood the devastating truth. I had won a game that nobody else was playing, and the prize was this profound, unending loneliness. One day, sitting in this very chair, the silence in the house became so heavy that it felt like it was pressing down on my chest. And in that crushing quiet, a memory surfaced, not as a gentle thought, but as a full sensory haunting. It was that morning with the burnt pancakes, the one Eleanor had mentioned. Suddenly I could smell the acrid smoke, I could hear the piercing shriek of the alarm, and I could see her, leaning against the counter, tears of laughter streaming down her face as I flapped a dish towel at the smoke detector in a panic. For her, it was a story of joyful, chaotic life. For me, at the time, it was a frustrating delay, an inefficient start to a day full of important meetings and deadlines. I had been so annoyed by the imperfection of that moment, so focused on the schedule it was disrupting. I was a man looking at his watch while the most beautiful show in the universe was playing out right in front of him. I was there, but I saw nothing. I was a ghost at my own breakfast table, and I didn't even know it. And that's when the dam finally broke. A truth so simple and so devastating washed over me, a realization that has become the final defining clarity of my 91 years. I would trade all of it back. Every single promotion, every bonus check, the corner office with the city view, the respectful nods from younger colleagues, every meticulously calculated investment that secured my future. I would gather it all up, the entire monument of my professional life, and I would set it on fire without a second thought for just one more of those mornings, just one. I would give it all away to be that foolish young man again, covered in flour, flapping a towel at a shrieking alarm, just to sit across from her at that rickety kitchen table and eat a plate of burnt pancakes. I would trade my entire legacy for one more imperfect breakfast with my wife. That is the great, terrible, and beautiful truth of my life. I climbed the wrong mountain, and I only saw the view from the top when it was too late. In that instant, the entire architecture of my life collapsed. The values I had lived by, the metrics I had used to measure my worth, were revealed to be a complete and utter fraud. I had spent a lifetime accumulating a currency that had no value in the only market that ever mattered, the economy of the human heart. I thought I was building a fortress of security, but a life isn't a fortress to be defended. It's a garden to be tended. I was so busy reinforcing the walls that I forgot to water the flowers, and now I am the king of a barren, silent kingdom. The game did change without warning, but the truth is, I had been playing the wrong game all along. I thought the goal was to arrive at the end with the most points, the most security. I see now that the only goal was to be fully present for the game itself, to notice the color of the sky, the sound of the music, and the feel of the hand you were holding. This realization didn't just stay with me. It began to color everything I saw. When I look out my window now, I see people rushing on the sidewalk below, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones, their minds clearly somewhere else. I see my younger self in all of them. I see a world of ghosts, a generation of people so obsessed with capturing the moment that they forget to live in it, so focused on building a future that they are sleepwalking through their present. They believe, as I once did, that they control the clock. They believe they are in the middle of a long story, with countless chapters yet to be written. They don't understand that the present is not a dress rehearsal. It is the only performance you are guaranteed to have. My story is reaching its final page, and all I can do is look back at the chapters I ghost wrote. But you are still in the middle of yours. You still have the pen in your hand. And my God, I hope you understand what a gift that is before the ink runs dry. This clarity didn't wash away the regret. It simply gave it a name and a place to sit. For months, the ghost of my younger self was an enemy I fought in this silent room, a fool I cursed for his blindness. But now I see him differently. I see a man terrified of failure, a man who genuinely believed that a thick wallet was the same as a safe harbor. He wasn't evil, he was just lost, navigating with a broken compass. I can't forgive him, because forgiveness feels too easy for the damage he caused. But I can understand him, and in that understanding, the sharp edges of my anger have worn smooth. The pain is no longer a storm that threatens to drown me. It's the quiet, constant tide, pulling at the shore of my memory. It's a weight I've learned to carry, a final, heavy piece of the life I chose. It is the price of my education, and the tuition was paid with all of my yesterdays, leaving me with nothing but the lesson itself. My world has shrunk to these four walls. My body is a failing vessel, and my time is measured in breaths. By all practical measures, my life's work is done, but I see now that my most important project has just begun. I cannot go back and unburn the pancakes. I cannot reclaim the evenings lost to paperwork or the conversations I only half heard. That past is sealed, a museum of my failures. But I can take the unbearable weight of this knowledge and shape it into something useful. I can turn my story from a private tragedy into a public map, a warning sign for those still on the road, those who still believe they have an infinite supply of tomorrows. This is my final act of service. It's the only way I know how to honor Eleanor now. My legacy isn't the money I left behind. It's the one lesson I'm leaving with you. This is my attempt to build something that truly lasts. And so, a strange kind of peace has settled in this room, a peace born not from happiness but from acceptance. The silence that once felt like a punishment now feels like a space for reflection. It's a quiet canvas on which these final, essential truths can be painted. I no longer fight the memories, I welcome them. I sit with the ghost of the man I was and the loving memory of the woman I failed, and I see the whole, tragic, beautiful tapestry of it all. I have made my peace with the fact that I learned the most important lesson of life in its final moments. My only hope, the one thing that gives this ending a sliver of grace, is that my late discovery might become your early warning. I am no longer a man haunted by his past. I am a messenger, carrying a single, urgent letter from the end of the road, addressed to anyone who is still lucky enough to be in the middle of theirs. The great irony of my long life is that my greatest failure has become my final, most important work. For decades, I measured my worth in dollars, in promotions, in the silent, steady appreciation of assets. I was a master of a language that meant nothing in the end. Now, I understand the only currency that matters is time, and the only wise investment is undivided attention. My regret is not a ghost I fight anymore. It is the raw material from which I have built this last testament. I cannot go back and taste the burnt pancakes with Eleanor, but I can offer you the map of the dead-end road I took. My legacy is not in a will or a bank account. It is this single urgent truth, paid for with a lifetime of absence. This is my final project, to turn the rubble of my past into a lighthouse for your present. It is the only penance that makes any sense, the only way to honor a life I finally understand. So please do not do what I did. Do not live your life as if it were a long commute to a distant destination. You are not in a waiting room. This is it. The messy kitchen, the interrupted conversation, the child who wants your attention, the partner who just wants to share a simple story. That is not the distraction from your life. That is your life. It's the whole show. I am at the end of the road, looking back at a journey I mostly missed. You are still in the middle of yours, with the map right in your hands. You still have time to notice the music, to taste the imperfect breakfast, to be present in the only moment you are ever guaranteed to have. Don't build a resume of a life you forgot to live. What will you do with the time that is still yours? What will you choose to see today?